Hello and welcome to Matcha Mornings, part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network. I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith, and I'm excited to dive deep on topics around holistic health, the power of food, hormone health, how the practices of yoga can impact our health and well-being, and much more. So grab your cup of tea, settle in, and let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Matcha Mornings. I'm Amanda, and I'll be your host for this and all episodes of the show. And I am so excited that you've decided to join me. This is the third episode of Matcha Mornings, and I'm just so excited that you're joining me on this journey and joining me for this interview. And today I am super excited to be joined by my dear friend, Chelsey Breta. Chelsey is a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, and I actually met her on our first 200-hour journey where we studied Hatha yoga in Bali, Indonesia. And her and I were actually on the same connecting flight from Taipei, Taiwan. And the yoga school had told us like, oh, you'll be picked up in Bali together, but you're actually on this flight together. And so while I was in Taiwan, I was keeping, my eyes open for somebody who looked like she might be on her way to yoga teacher training. And I didn't actually find Chelsey until we both got on the plane and she was sitting really close to me. And I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely her. And then we just started chatting and we've been really great friends ever since. And one of the things that I really love about Chelsey Breta is that she has been on this really beautiful journey of her moon cycle and the cycles of the moon in the sky, and she knows a ton about this stuff. We connected early on our journey being off birth control and tracking our cycles naturally, and since our journey in 200-hour teacher training, which was 5 years ago now, she has studied this so much, and she's created a really beautiful business called Moonrise Yoga, where she supports other women with moon gatherings and practices and moon circles and all that good stuff. So I'm really excited for this conversation, and we're going to talk about both the moon in the sky and how it cycles, and then how that relates to our own moon cycle or our menstrual cycle. And she talks a little bit about what each phase of the cycle is like, and the synchronicity between them is just really interesting to hear. So that is what we're going to focus on in this episode. And Chelsey's actually created a really beautiful resource for everyone. So there'll be a link to that in the show notes. So you can find that at wanderbarn.com. And then on the menu bar, just click Matcha Mornings and you'll find that, or scroll down to the latest posts. All right, without further ado, here's Chelsey Breta. I am super excited to be joined today by my good friend, Chelsey Breta. And the first thing we're going to do before we dive into our interview today is just ground with a meditation. So for everyone who's listening, I'd invite you to join us along, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It's such a pleasure to be here today and to share in this simple meditation just to open our call. So wherever you are, if you can come to a comfortable seat or lying down position, or just tune in if you're driving in the car or busy working listening to this. Bring your awareness forward into your heart center. And then allow the breath to extend with each inhalation and exhalation. Empty the breath completely. When you exhale, feel the softening of the body. And then you can bring a deeper breath in this time round to expand the heart and release. Again, as you inhale, expand to open the mind to receive today for our conversation. And as I share information about the moon cycle, how does it feel in your body to hear moon? To hear that women, us, womb-bodied beings, cycle with the moon. That we are intricately connected with her phases and our own moon monthly cycle. As we invite the helper beings, guides of 100% loving energy forth to guide our call, May you be present and receive exactly what you are meant to today. If you did close your eyes during this meditation, you can open them back up and we'll begin our call.
Amazing. Thank you for that. That was beautiful.
You're welcome.
And so, a great way to set the stage for that. And there's so much exciting stuff that I'm stoked to dive in with you today. But can you start by just telling listeners a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your journey with health, yoga, and then we'll dive into a little bit more about the moon?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. So let's see. In 2015 is where I met you in Bali for our first 200-hour yoga teacher training. And from there, after training, like everything shifted and really catapulted open for me. This idea of living a more mindful and intentful lifestyle really came flooding in. And I had this deep desire and knowing that there was more to what I had been experiencing in my early 20s thus far. And so, really, like my journey into health was all ignited from this yoga journey. And I had this awareness to be eating healthy foods and be eating high vibrational foods, such as organic and things like that. And really, where the journey took on for me with my moon cycle is after I got back from training, I began to tune into Elephant Journal Moon articles by this really amazing woman named Alex Miles. And I was like so intrigued. What does this mean? What is a new moon and a full moon? And I had never really been introduced to this realm before. And so over the years, I began to pay attention to the moon. And the moon very much dictates how I live my life and how I pay attention to different energies around me. And so it's just continued to catapult. And I've been seeing different people on social media or my close friends expanding into their health journey and their journey with food and their journey with their own moon cycle and the moon above. And so just over the last years, it's really compounded. And eventually I found myself really stressed out and missed my moon for about 5 months. And I knew I needed a deep healing journey. So I traveled out to Northern California near the Oregon border and chose to go live on a goat ranch that had a nice chunk of land. And I began to really tune into the earth there and feel her presence and feel the nature spirits and the trees and the water and feel into the elements. And at this opportunity, I had a lot of time to go inward. And at that time, I was feeling stressed out. So I really went inward to sit in meditation and sit with the different discomforts that were coming forward and to heal my moon cycle. That was very much a part of my intention a couple of years ago. And then while I was here, I started to learn about ritual and ceremony. And this was just all expanding. And it was almost like I was being guided from spirit to keep researching this and keep understanding the more magical details of life and how we can involve magic in our everyday interactions and how that looks. So for 2 years, I was on the ranch and spent a great deal of time by myself out there to really just discover the gifts that I have within and what I am here to do and here to be sharing outwardly. And that has been my journey thus far. Is it was very natural and organic, and life had always kind of been showing me that this is something I was going to be sharing and teaching about with my own journey of my moon cycle and coming off of hormonal birth control when I was about 20 years old. And now 7 years later, it's been infused into my whole life and how I practice and how I live my life according to the moon and all of the seasonal cycles that are all around us.
Yeah, amazing. I love all of that. And I remember, some of our first conversations way back in our 200-hour in 2015 were around, both of us had come off hormonal birth control and were using more natural methods of contraception and that sort of thing. And kind of in the circles that I had been used to with like my traditional friend circles, the friends that I'd had for ages, I was like this weird one who was taking this risk. And I just remember like it was so refreshing to sit down with somebody who was like in the same boat as me and just like kind of understood this like, I don't know, this need to like not have our cycles controlled by a synthetic hormone.
Totally. I remember having that conversation, especially when we were swimming in the pool. It just all came flooding back to me. And right. And I have also been looked at as the weird one. And I just knew that this truth was residing inside of me, that it felt good to follow that. And it didn't feel good because I was experiencing mood swings on the hormonal birth control. And I was going crazy. I would break down and cry and sob all day. And then the next day I was fine. And I wasn't really sure where that was coming from. I think I remember telling you that as well. So yeah, it's nice to connect on that level and just know that there are other options as well when it comes to focusing on our natural rhythm of what our body wants to be doing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember talking about that too, because I also had the same thing. My breaking point with being like, I need to make a change was throwing a sweater at Ryan over going on a hike that I wanted to go on. And I just like started crying after. I was like 22. Like, that's like kind of not really appropriate behavior for like a 5-year-old, much less like
Yeah.
a 22-year-old. It's like,
Yeah, no kidding.
like, whoa, it's like I was possessed by something evil. And I was like, okay, no more of this. It needs to stop now.
hmm Yeah, and there's just moments like that too. And I broke down crying too, and I was like, this doesn't feel normal or right, and it doesn't feel natural, because I have experienced like different bouts of sadness or like a depressed spirit before, but that didn't feel natural to me. It felt like it was out of the blue and not having a root cause. And then I figured it out that it was the birth control after coming off of it for about a year.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the natural going with the natural flow of the cycles is something I'm quite familiar with now because I've dove into that deep over the last couple of years personally. But in terms of, how the moon integrates into that, that's something I'm a little bit less familiar with. And so I'm thinking a good place to start would be to kind of go through like the phases of the moon. Can you walk us through like what each phase of the moon is and kind of what it represents?
Yeah. And so with the actual moon in the sky, and then there is the moon cycle of the monthly menstrual cycle that we experience. So at a new moon, we're really beginning to jump into this beginning phase. We have this idea of a dark moon right before the new moon in the sky. And so we're like cleansing, purging everything. So once a new moon starts, we begin to set intentions of what we really are, like what our heart is desiring and what our soul is calling us to. So it's a really nice time to sit down in a ritual or like create a longer space of ceremony and set in these seeds of intentions that you'd like to see come to fruition, maybe even by the end of the lunar cycle in about 29 and a half days, or maybe it will come back at its opposing new or full moon in the constellation about 6 months later. Or maybe it's just a deep rooted seed that needs to be set for like a couple of years from now. So whatever it is, we set the seed and then kind of let it go and allow the universe to like rearrange things in the ethers for us so it can come to fruition if it's aligned with your soul. So then we move and the moon continues to wax and we hit a first quarter moon and we can really pay attention to the seeds that we set. Are they beginning to sprout and grow? Because we can have little micro goals or intentions that we want to set. And then as we build to the full moon, we have the most energy in the sky. And we can begin to feel that even when we're interacting with other people. We're like, okay, this is like maybe something weird happened, or like there's just a lot of extra energy if you're sensitive to that. And you can just feel the full moon energy growing. So if where we are with our intention, it would be coming to a bud. Like if you think of a seed, now it's a bud. And then after the full moon, we start to wind down, the energy starts to lessen, and we start to go more inward. And so with the full moon, there's just a lot more external energy with the light of energy that is around. And with the new moon, there's less energy collectively. Because the moon pulls on the tides of the oceans, she too pulls on the tides of the waters within all human beings. So then we make it to our last quarter moon and we've flowered the intention that is here, and then the fruit comes and we get to harvest that. And pretty soon, by the end of the moon cycle, we come into the balsamic phase, or we're ready to compost anything that didn't serve us. And those are those dark days right before the new moon. And we get to get rid of anything that doesn't serve our highest good, doesn't serve the benefit to all people in the world, and get to set new intentions. So we have 13 moons per year that we get to move through and cycle through. And that means we also have 13 opportunities to set goals and intentions and these seeds to sprout fruit and then eventually release once we have finished those.
Okay,
Yes.
wow. That's I have so many questions from that, but yeah,
Okay.
thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing all of that. So my
Mhm.
first thing that I'm really intrigued with is like, okay, so we have the moon in the sky, and I feel like,
Mhm.
talking about the cycles or knowing your cycle, there's a really interesting correlation between the two. And one thing that I've always found really interesting is the fact that, in English we don't use like a masculine feminine, but in languages that do, like Spanish, for example, the moon is feminine, the sun is masculine. And obviously
Mhm.
that can be with masculine and feminine energy, but I think it is really interesting that the phases of the moon also seem to correlate really, I guess, like synchronistically or in line with the phases that we go through in our cycle as well. I'm curious if you can kind of touch on how those correlate, or at least how you've looked at them correlating.
Yeah, definitely. So, one thing I'd like to say is that everything in this physical earthly plane is a symbol and can create and spark ideas like where they're all kind of mirrors. So, even if we were to look at the sun cycle in the winter, fall and winter, that is very internal, slowing down energy, and that's very feminine. So, we want to like compost in the fall, set intentions with the sun cycle and the seeds in winter solstice. And think in the summertime, if you're living in four seasons, in the summertime, you're really external and you really are like having fun, like hiking around in nature or like planning all of these events, planning more travel. So that is a more masculine energy of the sun, right? So we have this union of the feminine and the masculine in everything if we really dive into it. So the moon does the same thing. And so then kind of what I hear you're saying and asking, Amanda, is maybe you'd like to understand how the moon and then the moon menstrual cycle correlate with one another. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So this comes into bleed time, and there are four distinct phases within the moon cycle itself. So, and the moon menstrual cycle, I'm talking. So, your bleeding phase and your fertility as a fertile woman in her fertile years. And so, when we bleed, that's day one of the cycle, the first day of bleeding. And this is called inner winter. So just like the sun cycle of winter outside, we go in, and start to pay attention to what's happening in our internal landscape. As a woman, you are the most intuitive during your bleeding time. And so it's time to slow down. It's our internal pause button. As a womb bodied person that we bleed, we need to slow down and honor the cycle because it's inner winter. And so after inner winter, after anywhere from 3 to 7 days, we start to enter inner spring. And so, just like out in nature, as spring rolls around, we have a lot of the energy beginning to build. And this is the follicular stimulating phase of the menstrual cycle. So, we're like actually preparing to release follicles that will eventually turn into an ovum or an egg to prepare for ovulation. So, we went from inner winter, really intuitive, really deep feminine energy, to coming more outward and sharing our energy with the world. So now our moon cycle is shifting into the masculine. And then as the body is internally preparing for the follicular stimulating phase, estrogen is rising. And then right before ovulation, progesterone also rises. And and ovulation is looked at as inner summer, the most external phase of the cycle. And we really want to go to like social outings and be around people. And we also are sharing pheromones and we're glowing from within. Like our body is fertile and ripe. And we want to share that with everyone that is around us. After ovulation ends, can be anywhere in the cycle, and it's not specific to certain days because you really have to pay attention to cervical mucus and taking your basal body temperature. If you're leaning into a more natural cycle of paying attention to your menstrual cycle. So this can happen between like day 11 and day 18, depending on what you're recording and the data that you're taking of your own cycle and body. After ovulation, we start to wind right back down, coming into the feminine energy of inner fall. So if there was no conception that happened during ovulation, as progesterone has increased, there's this intuitive, smart thing that happens in our body to start releasing the hormone to show us that it's time to release the endometrial lining. So we're preparing to bleed. And then that last part can last the inner fall or luteal phase can last anywhere from 10 to 14 days. And then it's a really wonderful time to look at like what isn't serving you in your own life, just kind of like the moon. Like when we compost at the dark moon right before we hit a new moon, it's the same thing in your own moon cycle. What needs to be composted? What doesn't feel good? Did my seeds of intentions work out, or maybe it wasn't in alignment, so I kind of let it go. And then all of a sudden we're back to inner winter. And women can cycle from 25 to 32 days. And it really just changes and switches with everything that's going on. Okay, so those are the phases. And this is a lot of information, so I'm going to keep going. The next thing is that as a woman, you can be synced with the moon in the sky. And so that means that you would bleed the darkest time of your own inner winter. You would bleed with the moon's inner winter at the new moon. And when you're in a new moon bleed, the energies that are present are you're in deep synchronicity with the earth and the sky, and you're very fertile with the natural cycle of life. So you are moving with the moon and her changing waters. And it seems to be like a nice, easy flow because you are connected with grandmother moon in the sky and with the moon, with your own moon cycle in the body. And you really want to be birthing creative energies. There's projects that maybe want to come into fruition. You're right in alignment with setting your seeds of intention with the moon in the sky. That means that you'd probably cycle and have your ovulation, the brightest, most external part of your cycle is with the full moon. And so even with that, the energies are synchronized and aligned with one another. So your external energy and the moon's external energy of being full are right in alignment. So then that's the new moon bleed, deep synchronicity with the earth, and you're very fertile in ideas and maybe even calling in a child, depending on where you are at in your life. The next one would be a full moon bleed, meaning that during your inner winter and your darkest time of inward seeking, the moon outside is super bright, it's full. And so this is the energy is known to this are the medicine woman or the witches or the healers, because you're living in direct opposition of the fertility of the earth and your own fertility. So they're directly opposite. And then that means that you would ovulate during the new moon. So when your internal body is the brightest, most external, the moon in the sky is actually really dark. So this is a time where you get to be the bright beacon of light for the rest of the collective who is experiencing a new moon, which is dark in the sky. And so these are two major energies of how you can sync up with the moon. I've been taught by my beautiful teacher, Usha Anandi, that along in this process, sometimes we're bleeding at the first or third quarter moons, and our body is really telling us that it's a phase of transition. And the body does like to bleed and cycle with the moon at the new and the full. If you're in transition of the first or third quarter moon, that like there's nothing wrong. It's just the body resetting, because the body is intuitive and primal and animalistic, that you're experiencing some transitions in your life and the body knows, and she will see you through to the other side for what transition you're coming to. Are you going to be a new moon bleeder or a full moon bleeder? And the body will eventually sync you up with that, especially if you're setting the intention to be synced up with the moon and to feel more heightened energies being aligned. And so I experienced a transition bleed for about 5 months this year. I wasn't linked up with the moon, and I really just took an eagle eye perspective and was like, okay, there are a lot of things transitioning in my life, and I'm still honoring my moon cycle and where I'm at to just see, can I sync up with the moon? And a few months ago, I synced up, and now I bleed with the full moon. And so right now I'm in my inner fall session, and I can really feel the internal energy of like, oh, I want to clean the house. I want to sit down and relax and read a book, and I want to journal. And I really just want to be in my space, smudging, meditating, any of those goodies that come along with slowing down in the energy field. So that's a lot of information right there of syncing with the moon and the phases. And
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, it's so much good stuff. Thank you for all of that information and for connecting it together. It's definitely really, really interesting. And I'm curious, you kind of mentioned this, but if somebody listening is like, okay, I really want to start like cycle syncing with the phases of the moon, is it setting the attention and then just starting to pay attention, or is there anything else that we can do to start really getting in tune with that?
Yeah, that's a really in-depth and beautiful question, because how I see that is really tuning in, like studying your own moon cycle. And I really like to keep a journal for this reason, just to see where my energies are at and to understand where the body is at. So when I journal, I draw a little moon, one in each corner of the top of my journal, and I draw a moon for where I am at in my phase. So it'll look like a dark moon if I'm bleeding, a bright full moon if I'm ovulating. And then opposite of that, I put where the actual moon phase is in the sky. So I can kind of see, am I in opposition of the moon? Am I like not um, in direct alignment with the moon? And so another way that we can take a peek at tuning into the moon is really tuning in by walking outside and picking one time of the day in the evening sky to just go look at where the moon phase is in the sky and see if she's waxing or waning, full or new, and pay attention to the light that she gives off in the sky. That's one really beautiful way to just plug in with the moon every day. At the same time, go take 5 minutes and travel with the moon's energy to see where she is. And then when we look inside of the body, I really, on my own journey, I've been using the fertility awareness method. And this method teaches you to take your basal body temperature every morning to understand where your cycle is. And then also to check your cervical fluids, because when we're building towards ovulation, I'm sure many of you women have seen that your cervical fluid begins to change in fluidity, elasticity. And so I really tune into paying attention. When you're ovulating, you have this egg white, clear, sometimes opaque streaks can come through in your cervical fluid. And there's a really beautiful book called Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Toni Wechsler. And she is a medical doctor who studied the actual menstrual cycle and puts it into light and very understanding for women to check where they are at on their own menstrual cycle. And so when you pay attention to the moon in the sky and you start taking the authority of paying attention to your body, maybe through the fertility awareness method, you really get to tune in. Like, what is my physical body moving through? Where are my hormone levels at? You know, maybe I'm feeling really fatigued all of a sudden because I kept saying yes to social outings, but really I'm in my inner fall phase where I'm about to begin bleeding in a 10 to 14 days. And I really just need to actually cancel and go inward. So paying attention to what energies come with your own menstrual cycle is really important. And then eventually you can see that the two will begin to sync together. So it's like embarking on this journey of paying attention to the moon in the sky and then your moon menstrual cycle as well.
Yeah, those are really amazing tips. And I love how much awareness there is there. And one thing I was thinking about as you were talking is like, you know, obviously I have kind of a regular morning practice and then meditation and yoga and that sort of thing and a journaling practice. But sometimes I feel like one of the struggles that I have is like I tune in and I pay attention to what's happening in my body and then I open my computer and I start working and it's so easy to get like so far from those things. And as you're talking, I'm like, man, there's so many like beautiful practices that we can put into our lives. And I guess I'm just curious, like, how you integrate all of this as, you know, an entrepreneur, and then also like just within having like a job and that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So I also have a morning practice, and I really like to smudge my space and make it clear out the energy and make it my own. And then I set intentions and I move through my body because energy wants to move through. So I have a nice yoga flow. And then I come down to Shavasana, and then I'll come up into a meditation. And in every day, I'm setting intentions in my prayers, connecting with my guides, with my well ancestors and my angels, or whoever is around me, whoever's in my divine team. And I just start plugging into that energy that is always surrounding me of the unseen realms, because I very much believe that we are guided, we have helpers in the unseen realms. And so I tune into that energy every day and I say, okay, maybe I woke up and I'm like in my luteal phase, inner fall, and I'm not feeling like so high energy, or maybe I'm like caught in a mind loop and I really want to compost that. I really ask for that to be let go of. And then I begin to call in the things that I am looking for. So if I'm setting the intention to sync with the moon, I can maybe call that in every day. Even when I was in a transition bleed time this last year, I called that in. I said, okay, I'm ready to be back with the moon because I feel a little bit off. And so I take a morning practice every single morning. And then I make sure to close out my little ritual of my yoga practice. And I have a singing bowl, so I like to play it at the end as well, just to close out my practice and be like, okay, my intentions are set. I give them over to my guides, to the universe, and then I can begin my day, because I too then jump onto my computer. But in the mornings, I'm my most creative. So it's like, okay, I have my morning practice, and then what is coming through during those meditations, and how can I bring that fertile creative energy from my womb space, especially if I'm in ovulation, I'm my most creative. How can I bring that forward and then go apply that energy? Or if I'm bleeding, maybe it's like really, really slowing down, but all of a sudden I'm getting all these intuitive messages and downloads coming through. And it's like, okay, yep, definitely need to journal about that. And I have all these ideas for my business to come forward. So I've really been growing Moonrise Yoga very authentically and organically by listening to my intuition and what's happening inside, and really just kind of like paving my own path and doing that and seeking guidance when I feel like I need it. And so that's really how I start my day. Drop into practice, jump on my computer, connect into who I need to, and then I go to work. And I have a really flexible work schedule, which has really been beneficial for me. I also choose to work out of traditional work settings, such as like a 9 to 5, because I really know that I am so creative in the morning and I need to utilize that energy. So really tuning into yourself, and when are the creative times for you during the day, and how can you utilize them? And lately, a couple of times I've been quite busy and recently, and I realized that I have all this creative momentum, but then the moment is like fleeting and passes me by. And then when I try and sit down to create, it's already gone. So I started paying really a lot more attention into that and being like, okay, I feel it in my body. I really want to create something. I need to get on my computer, or I need to journal an outline, or whatever it looks like for the courses that I have coming up, and tuning into that. And then at the end of the night, also to tune in, clear my space again, thank everyone for helping me today, find a gratitude practice of everything that is going on in my life, because every single situation is always going to lead me to the next highest evolvement when I'm tuning in and in alignment and listening. So having gratitude practice at the end of the day, and if anything like didn't feel good, I ask for it to be released out of my energy field and out of my body, so I can go to bed, sleep soundly, and start this process over again. And this has been a really big process of discipline for me in the last couple of years, is to sit down and create the space to have a meditation practice and a mindful movement practice. And sometimes I dance in the mornings if I am not feeling the yoga practice, although I know how great yoga makes me feel just to tune into all the areas of the body. And then maybe I'll get up and dance. So it doesn't have to look so rigid. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the moon cycle and tuning into yourself, is that it's a very feminine energy. So flowing with it, and whatever is calling you that day, honor it and listen to it, because maybe that muse is going to teach you something along the way. And so it has been a discipline to just be like, okay, I'm dedicated to this journey. And to even get my creative energy stirring, I need that time to myself in the morning. And so I have really began to just carve that out over the last couple of years on my healing journey.
Hey everyone, we're taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about Muse. Muse tracks your brain during meditation to give you real-time feedback on your meditation, guiding you into the zone and solving the major problem that most of us have when starting a meditation practice. Muse lets you know when you're doing it right. Your Muse headband basically acts like your personal assistant. While you meditate, Muse measures whether your mind is calm or active and translates that data into sounds. When you're calm, you'll hear peaceful sounds, and when your mind wanders, the sounds will intensify, guiding you back to a calm state. So if you're like me, where you have a really solid meditation practice and you love to do it every day or every couple of days, but sometimes you just find that you really can't get in the rhythm because your mind is so busy, Muse might be for you. The best part about this is that I have a 15% discount off just for listeners of Matcha Mornings. So head on over to bit.ly/Matcha Mornings Muse to get your discount. All right, back to the episode. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I feel like it is, especially as like, I guess yoga entrepreneurs or business owners or solopreneurs, whatever you want to identify as. I think it does take that discipline, like you said. I think I can definitely relate to a ton of things that you were talking about. Like I can completely relate to these moments of creativity feeling fleeting. And I think it's one of the great things about being able to work for yourself and control some more of your schedule, because it is a lot easier to, drop maybe what you're doing and really tune into those moments of creativity. And it was making me think about how you were talking about sort of the different phases of the moon cycle, and then also like our personal moon cycles, and how there's different times of the month when we're more creative, where we're more internal. In terms of like kind of flowing with that, are there different things that you do when kind of setting up like what a month looks like for you?
Definitely. I was thinking about that before the call. Yeah, when I know that I can determine my own schedule, I will have meetings with clients, meet up with friends, like catch up with people when I am done bleeding and entering inner spring and summer. It's like the time I want to maybe go see a show and go dance, or go into community and join into a kirtan or like drum circles or whatever that may look like. And I really honor and keep that space separate, because if I'm overloading myself for the feminine part of inner fall and winter, I'm totally depleted, and that will bring energy into the next cycle. So during inner fall and inner winter, I do try to stay low. I'm such a homebody. I love to be home. I love to cook food. So I really nourish myself in those ways. And like I mentioned earlier, like journaling and like, being with my crystals, or like having a ritual or ceremony, and maybe using some divination tools such as cards, oracle cards or tarot cards. And yeah, just paying attention to all of that. It's really important. And then it's also this feminine way of living your life according to your cycles. So for 2 weeks, I schedule all the things and I'm really out there and busy. And then I can start to slowly wind down, and then know for sure by the time that I'm bleeding to give myself those 2 or 3 days to really just drop into what's happening for me in a physical level. And so planning my year ahead too, and like understanding that my moon and bleed time could switch, but kind of knowing that as long as I keep setting this intention, I'm hoping that it will continue to be according to the moon and aligned with the moon as I am right now. And so it's important to just like honor the femininity that is within us as a womb-bodied person, that we very much have these cycles for a reason. And I mean, our ancient lineage of women have known this because we were living on the land and so connected with the sky and the earth. And we knew all of these things very intuitively. And I'd say it's just been lost. It hasn't been a rite of passage to learn about the moon cycle or your own menstrual cycle. And some cultures are still carrying this and teaching this. And where I'm coming from, as, you know, being part of the colonizing energy that has come to the United States. And where I grew up, this was very much not talked about. And I kind of have had to figure it out on my own. But that was that deep knowing within me 5 years ago that there was something more with the moon cycle. And I really wanted to start studying and learning about it. Is that, yeah, this is how women were living their lives, by paying attention. It's like we have 2 weeks outward energy, 2 weeks inward energy, and we can really flow like that. And it's also like a moon minded business platform as well, knowing that I can really put all my energy and effort forth in complete projects during ovulation. And then when I'm coming inward, it's like, okay, now it's time to open up and receive all the messages and guidance that I have coming through about like what is to be birthed next, and listening to that intuitive energy.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And so do you, when it's your bleed time, do you kind of keep your schedule like as clear as possible? Is that kind of part of what that ritual looks
Yeah,
like?
yeah, definitely. That is so true. Um, I keep it clear, and like whatever I feel like doing that day, I really just allow it to come through. And so, like I mentioned, I'm very grateful that I have a flexible work schedule and that I can be honored in that way of just like tuning in and having other people understand where I'm at. And so, yeah, especially with working at my job, I take days off and really just like tune inward and make all these really yummy foods and really nourish myself. I like to see it as the ultimate act of self-care and self-love, is tuning into your bleed time and your moon cycle and honoring the different phases that are coming through.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really important too. I feel like, I mean, you know a little bit about, my journey and stuff, but I remember I came from a similar background as you. Like, I remember having really, really heavy menstrual cycle when I was in my early teens. And so, my mom, no fault to her, this is just what she knew at that time, was took me to the doctor, and the doctor said, okay, let's put her on birth control. So I was on birth
Mm-hmm.
control from the early years of my cycle until I was in my early 20s. And I was like, okay, I need to stop this. And then I lost my cycle for a while, and it took a long time to like reconnect with it. And I think even then it was like there wasn't a lot of, I made that one step towards like a more natural cycle and let my body kind of dictate it. Yet, I was working a busy job in retail where, it's Saturday. It doesn't matter if you have your period or
Mm-hmm.
if you are high energy, like you have to show up. And I think that for me, it's taken like a couple more years of learning more about this to start honoring more of those phases, and then figuring out how I can keep, my life and my business going while still honoring me. And makes me think about, I've heard, from ancient times that women would get together and be in a dark space and they would just have their menstrual cycles together. And I'm like, man, there's like, that would be so amazing to just go and sleep and rest and do nothing but that for a couple of days. Yet for most of us, that's not the reality we live in, So it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like bringing in the little bits of it that we can with our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up that point, because if we look at the culture of the West and what we have been like conditioned to, is to always be pushing forward, always to be reaching the goal, go, 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 especially in the corporate world. Even like if you're working retail or whatever it looks like, we're asked to go, 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 go. And so maybe we just don't even have the knowledge or the awareness quite yet to be like, actually, no, I need to figure out something a little bit different. Or maybe you're being asked to step out and find something that's more in alignment with what you want to be doing for work as well. And another point I'd like to mention is, it is so powerful to go sit with just women, to go sit in sister circles, so you can begin to share these energies with each other and see if there's similarities or if something is different. And like one woman is experiencing this and what she has discovered in her own moon time. And I've really been coming into woman everything for the last few years. And I love to just go sit with a friend and go sing out in nature and like make up songs with them. And there's something so powerful about women having space just to be with one another, just to witness one another and connect on that level. And maybe if you are in this linear realm of the physical world where you are working a corporate job, or you are working retail, or however that looks, or you can't just dictate how your schedule looks and you don't have the freedom to be doing that at the moment, then carve out that time to go sit with women, whether it's on a full moon or a new moon, and wherever you are on your cycle, just to go sit and be nourished with women that is authentic in conversation, that's real, that's not like the almost like toxic femininity of being jealous, of complaining, of like talking about your partner or whatever that looks like. Instead, allow it to be rich and fertile, and like maybe even write out a dialogue of some like deep internal questions that you are seeking to know from your sisters. Because when we gather as women, we are the moon, we are cycling, and we carry this energy being a womb bodied person. And so I really encourage that as well, to find a sister circle or create one of your own. It doesn't have to be some big extravagant thing. Just invite some of your really close soul sisters, your witchy friends, your healer friends to come gather together and start to seek that out as well. And when you put the energy outward to do that, it will come back to you, even if it takes some time. But then we can really take that approach to tuning into the moon energy by sitting with sisters if your schedule doesn't allow for you to have that time for yourself. And maybe that's on a weekend, on a Saturday when it's not even aligned with your moon, but at least you're being nourished by sister time.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful suggestion. And I love that you brought up at the end, like maybe it just is on the weekend when it works best for your schedule. I think there's always like I always think about like better than, I guess. And I think that, doing something that's going to start connecting you is better than doing nothing. And if your job or your current schedule doesn't allow you to dive fully into all of it, it's looking at how you can bring pieces into it to start integrating with the cycles of the moon.
Mm-hmm. And that's all part of the intention setting. If this is really like sparking something deep within inside of you or getting you excited, or you feel like this impulse of the heart, then I really encourage you just to set those intentions, and it's accessible to each one of us. And it is better than like, I didn't develop this lifestyle overnight. It's taken me 5 years, almost 7 years to flow in this feminine based reality that I choose to see through the lens as and tune into my body. So it is a process and it doesn't happen overnight. And I really just encourage every womb bodied person to invite this into their life and have these intentions set with your new moon, intentions of the moon in the sky. I'd also like to mention that if you're opposite or in transition bleed, then you can set any intention when you start to bleed on day one as well. So even if you're opposite or not aligned with the new moon bleed, you have even more times to set intentions, and it's like amplified at that point. And so just to whatever is accessible to you. There's online women support groups. I am looking to offer a new moon call for women just to jump on with Zoom, and we can all just see each other virtually and have it be a really mindful space for all of us to come together. And then, are there any moon circles in the place that you're living? Or do you know anyone who would be interested in just like sitting down with you and going outside and looking at the moon on a certain night that works for your schedule? And you can start small. And if it's your intention to eventually live a life based in this reality of cycling with the moon, then it will absolutely come.
Yeah, I love that. That's really beautiful. I have a question that's kind of tied back to something you said a little bit before. I was thinking about how I really love how you talked about like the journaling practice with one moon that's where you're at in your cycle, and then one moon that shows where you're at, like where the moon is at physically in the sky. I'm curious if, as people are in transition and if they're not fully aligned, when it comes to like the different habits or rituals that you're creating within that, would you go towards like the cycle that your body's going through, like your personal moon cycle? Does that make sense?
What I kind of hear you asking me is are you tuning into your own natural cycle more than tuning into the moon?
So it's kind of like, say you are in like the bleed phase of your own cycle, and say it's like the, I don't know, first quarter of the
First
moon.
or third. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you're looking at like, okay, so the first third quarter could be, different types of intention setting, and you're in this phase of like deep internal time, do you really connect with that like deep internal time because that's what your body rhythm is on, or do you bring in those elements of where the moon's at too?
Yeah, it's a total weaving. You it's always really recommended to pay attention to what your physical animal primal body is going through and journal about that. And I'll put that specific moon. If I'm bleeding and we just hit the first quarter moon, okay, I'm putting that is there. And listen to what your body is. But now it's this practice, this like weaving of bringing, okay, what is the moon doing in the sky? If it's in the first quarter moon, the collective energy that the moon's affecting is we're building towards a full moon, but I'm bleeding right now and I'm bleeding right now. So, okay, I'm tuning into that. I'm writing everything down. I'm seeking inwardly, like what my intentions are, like what guidance am I receiving, like intuitive downloads are happening. And just to know that, okay, yeah, and the moon is building towards a full moon, and that's all great. And there are amplified energies as we build to the full moon. And I'm still right here in inner winter and I'm bleeding. And so it's just like, how do you weave that through? Journal about it. And okay, how does that make you feel? Even when you bleed opposite of the moon, if you're bleeding on the full moon, I've because that's the cycle I'm on right now, I've really been feeling that I've had to do some weaving too, is that the collective is energetically outward, but I'm going inward on my own cycle. So how do I find that deep reservoir of energy, to hold circle for the full moon circle or show up if I need to? And so it's just a delicate balance of, yeah, pay attention to what's happening in your own body and then just observe what the moon is doing. And you can just connect to her by observing the energies that are correlated with that.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for tackling
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned quite a few rituals that you have throughout the month. Your morning routine with your meditation and your physical yoga practice, maybe some dancing, lots of journaling. Are there any other practices or rituals that you do throughout the month that you found to be like quite helpful for you to tune into your moon cycle?
Yeah. And with the moon up in the sky, I really like to use the divination tool of tarot cards. And so I will sit and like create a little space that feels good to me. And I'll pull cards to be like, okay, we just hit the full moon. What is coming up for the next 2 weeks? Or like, what can you share with me? Or, affirm that's happening right now and just kind of open that space. Um, for just tuning into my own cycle and rituals, sometimes I'll do abdominal womb massage. I am a huge component of breast massage and moving the lymph up and down my body. So I really honor my own physical body by every time I take a shower, oiling up my body and using a gua sha Japanese massage tool to pull the lymph up from my extremities towards my heart. And that is a huge self-care tool that I use. And when I'm near my bleed time, I use a heating pack and massage my abdomen and even hold my hands right over my womb just to send her some extra energy for an easeful release of my moon cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really beautiful practices. I also there's a rice, I don't know if it's a rice bag, like something that you can heat up in the microwave and it feels so good. I haven't had that traveling for a couple of years. I used to have a hot water bottle when I was more I guess stable in my living situation, and now that I've been more nomadic, I haven't had that, and it's a reminder of how beautiful that can be. But I really love like putting my hands on my abdomen and just breathing into it. And I feel like sometimes the experience of being in the physical body can be really strange because you experience these sensations that you can't really control, and it's your body telling you something. And so I feel like it's kind of my way of like reassuring my ovaries, like, okay, you got it, it's okay, sending you some love today.
Definitely. So two things. There has been different studies around and knowledge passed down through herbalists and things like that, is that if you eat root vegetables and red foods during your bleed time, the root vegetables are high in minerals and replace the mineral content that is lost through your bleeding. And then red foods such as raspberries or beets are really beneficial as well. And then you can even food cycle sync and eat more light foods during ovulation, depending, of course, like what's going on with your own dosha, according to Ayurveda, because I very much bring that forward too. But warming dense foods when you're bleeding is super nourishing for the body. So I really pay attention to that. So that is part of a ritual that I partake in. So when we think about our moon, Ayurvedically and in a lot of indigenous communities, our moon time really does not need to be painful, and we really do not need to be experiencing a lot of these premenstrual symptoms. And so when we start to tune in with our body and honor and respect the external energy and the time to come internally, we can really begin to eliminate a lot of the painful periods or the PMS symptoms that we move through. A lot of the times why this is coming up is because we are ignoring our internal realm and our intuitive body, and we're pushing forward all the time instead of having that sacred pause button when we bleed and tuning into our bodies. So another thing with that is, I grew up using tampons, and then it was organic tampons and with no applicator to save the earth. And then I moved to a Diva cup. And even with the Diva cup, I eventually started to realize that as soon as I put the cup inside, I was experiencing cramping and it didn't feel good. And so I found some herbs to help with that. One is cramp bark that you can get as a tincture at most health food places. And that is amazing. But what I found out is that I love to free bleed. And my version and association with free bleeding is bleeding into panties, whether you have a traditional pad or there are different companies that make undies that have an absorbent layer built into the underwear, such as Thinx. And Thinx gives one of these panties to a gal in need, like a younger gal that maybe would be skipping school if she was in her bleed time. So I love that cause and to support that as well. But I really enjoy just bleeding into my underwear now and just having that free flow of downward energy instead of having my cup inside where the energy of like releasing is being held there and trapped until I release from my cup. And I've been doing this for the last few months, and it's such a game changer for me to just have that natural flow of energy outward. And I also pay attention that if I feel like I can feel cramps coming on, I just pause wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, and breathe and try and soften my body. Because when we bleed, it's a very yin energy. So it's passive. And instead of like holding on and tensing up because it might not feel good, if you can just breathe into that energy and just let it flow and soften your womb, and then, put your hands on your womb and massage your womb and just be like, okay, I understand, body. You really want to release and you really want to be soft and tender right now. And you can do this practice even at work, just to be like, okay, relax, 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 because I am here bleeding. And so paying attention that, yes, our moon cycles don't have to be painful, and maybe like searching with curiosity of why are they? Did I push myself too hard in my last moon cycle that now it's manifested to a more painful period? Was I really stressed out? Did a big family or life traumatic thing happen? And now I'm like really feeling it in my moon cycle, because our moon is telling us and sharing information with us on a very energetic level as well. So if you start to begin to practice and bring this in to just kind of flow with the masculine and the feminine energies, the changing of energies every 2 weeks. And after a few months, maybe you begin to notice that your pain or your periods aren't so painful, and you can really soften as they come around as well. Mm-hmm. And so those are some big notes that I wanted to share. And then just if you feel cramps from tampons or a Diva cup, search alternative options. There's plenty out there. There's cute shops on Etsy that are making moon underwear, moon liners that are washable and reusable, and we're really reducing the carbon footprint of being a bleeding woman.
Yeah, absolutely. I love all of those pointers. And I remember reading Woman Code by Elisa Vitti, which I think you actually recommended to me. And that was the first time that I'd ever heard the concept of, our periods don't have to be painful. Like PMS doesn't have to be, we don't have to have symptoms, like we're meant to do this. And I feel like that was a really big game changer for me. And then also yeah, I still use my Diva cup, and I'm going to pay attention this next cycle. But for the last couple of years, I've really loved that change as opposed to tampons. And I also have some pairs of Thinks, and I think that they're awesome, not only for the environmental impact, but just for the fact that like you just buy them once and then you can just wash them and use them again. Like that's so great in terms of
such a game changer and so amazing just to have them on hand, especially when you're traveling.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like for me, being able to have like I have three pairs of them. I have the lighter ones. I use them more as like a panty liner with my Diva cup, and or for the
Mm-hmm.
lighter days. And it's just amazing. Like I always have that stuff with me everywhere I go. And the first time I traveled, I was really unsure of what the feminine hygiene situation would be like in other places around the world. And so I packed like enough tampons for like 6 months. I'm not even joking you.
Yeah. Or like even to know with that, like, while I'm traveling, is there going to be a place where I can wash my hands? Especially if you're using the cup. So having the backup of the Thinks panties or whatever it looks like, I love that idea, especially for traveling. And that's why I first bought my Thinks panties, and now I use them all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll
Mm-hmm.
make sure there's a link to those for sure. And this conversation's been so amazing. I could, obviously you and I usually chat for hours at a time anyways. We've spent full
Yeah.
weekends talking about all this stuff, but I want to be mindful of your time and also listeners' time. Is there any go-to resources that you have for this kind of stuff? I know you've mentioned like a couple of books and that sort of thing, but is there anything else, any tracking apps, anything like that have been really helpful for you in terms of getting started?
Great question. Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Toni Wetchler is 100% a must read, especially if you're looking into fertility awareness method and coming off of birth control and paying attention to when you are fertile and when you're ovulating to help prevent pregnancy or even to help you conceive. You can use it both ways because you're just so in tuned. I love that book. I received it when I was 20 years old, and it was the biggest gift that I've ever received. And then I really like to use the tracking app called Lily, Lylly. And on the Apple App Store, it's like a little pink hibiscus flower that is associated with it. And it's the whole fertility awareness method charting system. And you have the option to put in when your period starts, how heavy your bleeding is, if you've had sexual intercourse, and if you use any additional contraception, condom, whatever it looks like. And then you also get to track your ovulation fluids there. So it'll be like, okay, it's like spongy and cloggy, meaning I'm not ovulating, or I'm building the ovulation, so I'm experiencing this milky, watery, or right at ovulation, I'm choosing to put in that, yes, it was egg white. It had opaque streaks in it, and it was really watery. And so I love that. I've just recently looked at how many cycles I've used with that app, and I've put it in for 44 cycles now that I've been using this app. And it's so awesome because if I'm on the go and I'm going to be having sex and I really need to know, like, okay, where am I at on my cycle? Did I pass ovulation already? Like, where's my basal body temperature at? I get to go check on the app, pull up my phone really quick, be like, okay, I'm on day 25. I'm almost going to be bleeding. Like, this is a more safe time for me to be involving myself in sexual intercourse. And so I love the Lily app. And then there are just really, the Women Code book is an amazing resource as well. And then they just keep like getting more ethereal, and there are so many beautiful resources out there. And then even on my website, Moonrise Yoga, I'm going to be launching some yoga for the moon cycle videos. And so that can be a resource as well to help you tune into, okay, this is how much energy I have, and I can do this type of practice. And then if I'm bleeding, I like to do a more yin yoga practice. So there's definitely those resources available coming from me soon as well.
Amazing. And I'll make sure there's a link to your website also. And thank you so much for this conversation. This has been such a great conversation, and I'm so excited to share it.
Thank you. I'm so excited we got to get together, and just that our lives have evolved into this, and you have this beautiful platform, and then I've been just studying this energy on my own for so long, and that I get to share that outwardly. And if anyone has any questions or wants to know more, or maybe look for more in-depth resources, don't be afraid to reach out to me. I love hearing from people and connecting with people and hearing your own story, because as women, it's so important that we just witness one another and hold space for one another to be growing and exploring and experiencing our most full self. And we can really empower ourselves by paying attention to our moon cycle as well. So I'm happy to be sharing.
Absolutely. And if people want to reach you, is your website the best place to find you?
Yes. And my website is yogamoonrise.com. You can also follow me on moonrise.yoga on Instagram. I'm always posting different things according to the natural rhythms of the earth, such as right now we're in the Imbolc portal. So the halfway point between winter solstice and the spring equinox. And I post different ceremonies and rituals on my blog posts on the website, and Instagram is always a great place to catch up with me and see what I'm doing in my everyday.
Amazing. I'll make sure there's links to that. And yes, I've learned so much from your Instagram. So thank you for all that you share there.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming on. I hope that everyone enjoyed that episode of the podcast as much as I did. I just always adore talking with Chelsey Breta about all things, but really health, wellness, hormones, yoga. That's what most of our conversations revolve around anyways. And there were a few different resources mentioned in this episode of the show. And if you are interested in getting your hands on Woman Code by Elisa Vitti, which is a resource that Chelsey Breta mentioned, and also one of the most game-changing books I've ever read for cycle syncing and women's fertility, I have a free 30-day trial of Audible for listeners of the podcast. So you can head on over to bit.ly/Matcha Mornings Audible and sign up for that. So it's a free 30-day trial, which means you can get a copy of a book like Woman Code. So once again, bit.ly/Matcha Mornings Audible, and that link will be on the show notes, which you can find at wanderbarn.com/Chelsey Breta, CHELSEYBRETA. All right, that's everything. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Matcha Mornings. To find links mentioned in this episode, show notes, photos, and more, head on over to wanderbarn.com/podcast/matcha-mornings. To be the first to know about brand new episodes of Matcha Mornings, subscribe on your podcast app. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, please leave a review or send me an email at wanderbarn@gmail.com with the subject line Matcha Mornings. To follow along with me, Amanda Kingsmith, you can find me on Instagram at Amanda Kingsmith to learn more about other fun projects I'm working on. To find more great podcasts like this one on topics such as travel, the business of yoga, cryptocurrency, and more, head on over to wanderbarn.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.